Hey everyone, today we're going to talk about a club with an incredible history. It was once a giant in England, dominated Europe, then fell and struggled, and now it's back in the Premier League. This is Nottingham Forest, the only team that can claim to have more Champions League titles than English League championships. If you love great football stories, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join us on this amazing journey. Nottingham Forest Football Club is one of the most traditional clubs in England, with a history full of highs and lows, marked by historic titles, periods of crisis, and an intense relationship with its fans. Founded in the mid-19th century, Forest conquered English and European football, especially under the leadership of Brian Clough in the 1970s and 1980s. The story of Nottingham Forest begins on May 22, 1865, at a meeting held at the Clinton Arms, a pub in the city of Nottingham. A group of shinny players, a Scottish sport similar to field hockey, decided to create a football team as the sport was beginning to gain popularity in England. The club was named Nottingham Forest Football Club and adopted red as its main color, inspired by the Garibaldini, an Italian militia led by Giuseppe Garibaldi. In 1866, Forest played its first official match against Notts County, one of the oldest clubs in the world. Nottingham Forest was one of the first clubs to use nets on the goals in an official game in 1891. The first major title came in 1898 with the FA Cup victory after defeating Derby County 3-1. From its early years, the club already showed potential to be a giant of English football. At the beginning of the 20th century, Nottingham Forest established itself as an important club in England, but success was not consistent. The club fluctuated between the first and second divisions. During World War I, football was interrupted, and Forest faced financial difficulties. In 1949, Forest was relegated to the second division after a disastrous season. During this period, the club experienced highs and lows, without significant national prominence. After World War II, Forest began to show signs of recovery. It returned to the first division in 1957. In 1959, it won its second FA Cup, defeating Luton Town 2-1. In the 1960s, Forest occasionally contended for the English title in some seasons, but the team could not maintain competitiveness for long. Forest was in search of a leader to take it to the top, and that leader was about to arrive. In 1975, Nottingham Forest hired Brian Clough as manager, and that's when everything changed. Clough had already made history with Derby County, leading the club to the English title in 1972, but he wanted more. Clough brought his strong personality and innovative methods, which included strict discipline, focus on team play, intense physical preparation. In 1977, Forest was promoted to the first division after winning the second division. In 1978, now in the elite, the club won the English Championship in its first season back. In 1979, Forest captured the Champions League, then called the European Cup, defeating Malmö 1-0. In 1980, Forest won the Champions League again, defeating Hamburg 1-0 with a goal from John Robertson. Nottingham Forest became the first and remains the only club to have won more Champions League titles, 2, than domestic league titles, 1. Other significant achievements in the Clough era: won the UEFA Super Cup in 1979, won the English League Cup twice, 1978 and 1979, reached the Champions League semi-finals in 1984. Brian Clough transformed Nottingham Forest into a European giant in just 5 years. After the golden years under Brian Clough, Nottingham Forest began to feel the weight of maintaining their top status. The peak had been intense, but football was changing, and Forest started to lag behind. The 1980s were a mix of flashes of greatness and clear signs of decline. Forest still had good league campaigns, finishing in the top 5 several times. In 1989 and 1990, Forest won the League Cup, showing that the team still had the talent to compete for titles in smaller competitions. In 1991, they reached the FA Cup final, but lost to Tottenham. It seemed that Forest was still alive, but the cracks were starting to show. During the 1980s, English football began to change. Foreign investment started to pour into clubs like Manchester United and Arsenal. The Premier League was created in 1992, introducing a more profitable business model for clubs. Forest, on the other hand, lacked the financial structure to keep up with this transformation. Wealthy teams were strengthening with big signings, while Forest tried to survive with what they had. Brian Clough was always a master of motivation and building competitive teams, but even he began to feel that modern football was slipping from his grasp. Forest relied too heavily on homegrown talents and players from its academy, and opponents began to have an advantage in squad quality. Then the on-field problems began. Campaigns started to deteriorate. The team fought in the lower parts of the table, unthinkable in the previous decade. Clough, previously seen as untouchable, began to be criticized by fans and the press. Was the magical Brian Clough losing his touch? In the 1992-93 season, Nottingham Forest was in free fall. The team suffered from injuries, especially to key players like Stuart Pearce. The attack was dysfunctional. The team's top scorer managed only 7 goals for the entire season. Forest went 15 games without a win during a critical part of the season. It was painful to see Forest, once a giant, fighting to avoid relegation. On May 1, 1993, Forest faced Sheffield United. The game ended in a 2-0 defeat, mathematically sealing their relegation. Brian Clough, visibly distraught, stood by the pitch, motionless. After 18 years as Nottingham Forest manager, Brian Clough announced his retirement. Brian Clough left Forest with a monumental legacy, but the end was bitter. In his last interview, Clough said, "I gave Forest the best years of my life, but now it's time for someone younger to try." The fans, though devastated by the relegation, paid an emotional tribute to the manager. In the last round, even with Forest already relegated, Clough received a standing ovation from 30,000 fans at the City Ground. The players were in tears, knowing that it was the end of a magical era. Clough fell, but his name was etched in eternity. Without Brian Clough, Nottingham Forest lost its identity. The club hired numerous managers in the years that followed, but none could recreate Clough's magic. Every season, the club attempted to rebuild and failed. In 1994, under the leadership of Frank Clark, a former Forest player, the team finally returned to the Premier League, finished second in the championship. Clark managed to rebuild a competitive team, highlighted by Stan Collymore, a striker who was the top scorer in the promotion campaign, Stuart Pearce, the captain who stayed to lead the team back to the elite, and Forest returned in grand style. In 1995, they finished third in the Premier League. Secured a spot in the UEFA Cup, now Europa League. Reached the UEFA Cup quarter-finals in 1996, only to be eliminated by Bayern Munich. It seemed that Forest was becoming a giant once again. However, the success was short-lived. Stan Collymore was sold to Liverpool for a record fee at the time. Without their main attacking reference, Forest gradually weakened. In 1997, they were relegated again, returned to the Premier League in 1998, and were relegated once more in 1999. The up and down continued, up, down, up, down. In 2005, Forest hit rock bottom, finished 23rd in the championship, was relegated to League One, 3rd Division. Nottingham Forest, a 2-time European champion, was now playing in small stadiums against non-traditional teams. They spent 3 seasons in the 3rd Division, 2005 to 2008. Finally, they returned to the championship in 2008. But the dream of returning to the Premier League seemed distant. For more than a decade, Forest was stuck in the championship. They came close a few times, reaching the playoffs in 2010 and 2011, but were eliminated. They changed managers more than 20 times in 20 years. Financial problems nearly led the club to bankruptcy. It seemed like Nottingham Forest was doomed to remain a mediocre team forever. From 1999 to 2022, Forest spent 23 years outside the Premier League. However, the fans never abandoned the team. The city ground remained packed even in the worst moments. The jersey was too heavy to be forgotten. But like all good football stories, a turnaround was coming. Forest just needed a new hero to change its fate.
After more than 2 decades of suffering and disappointment, Nottingham Forest finally found a new path in 2021, starting with the arrival of a name now synonymous with hope for Forest fans, Steve Cooper. When Steve Cooper was hired in September 2021, Forest was in collapse. The team had started the season with just 1 point from 7 games. They were last in the championship table. The atmosphere among players and fans was one of total dismay. Cooper arrived, looked at the squad and thought, "It's ugly, but fixable." And he really fixed it. Cooper introduced a playing philosophy based on high pressure, solid defense, and quick attacks. He bet on young and loaned players, such as Brennan Johnson, son of a Forest legend, became the main name in the attack. James Garner, on loan from Manchester United, dominated the midfield. Dijed Spence, an offensive fullback, who became key in counter-attacks. Cooper managed to unite the squad, instill confidence, and the results showed on the field. After that terrible start to the season, Nottingham Forest shot up the table, moved from last to the playoff zone in a few months. In 22 games under Cooper's leadership, Forest accumulated 51 points. Championship pace. They won crucial matches against favourites like Fulham and West Bromwich. The fans began to believe again. City ground was buzzing and Forest seemed unstoppable. Finished the regular season in 4th place. In the playoff semi-final, they beat Sheffield United in penalties after a dramatic game. Bryce Samba was the hero, saving 3 penalties. In the grand final at Wembley, they faced Huddersfield Town. It was a tense final, right? Tight game, chances for both sides. The winning goal came at 43 minutes of the first half. An own goal by Levi Colwill after a cross from James Garner. Forest held on to the result until the end, and when the referee blew the whistle, fans in tears, players crying on the pitch, Steve Cooper raising his arms to the crowd. After 23 years, Nottingham Forest was back in the Premier League. Everyone knew the mission was clear, to stay in the Premier League, and Forest did everything to strengthen the team. Brought in 30 players during the transfer window. Total spend, about £150 million, one of the biggest investments of the season. Forest practically assembled a new team in a few weeks. Dean Henderson, goalkeeper on loan from Manchester United. Jesse Lingard, former Manchester United. Morgan Gibbs-White, club's most expensive signing, £42 million. Renan Lodi, fullback on loan from Atletico Madrid. But even with all these reinforcements, the season was tough. Started with a win against West Ham, 1-0. Forest spent much of the season flirting with relegation. However, the fans remained loyal. City Ground was one of the noisiest stadiums of the season. In the penultimate round, Forest faced Arsenal, who were fighting for the title. 1-0 with a goal from Taiwo Awoniyi, a result that secured their stay in the Premier League. When the referee blew the final whistle, the celebration was incredible. Fans stormed the field, players were in tears, and Forest was officially safe. The following season, the objective was clear: keep the team in the elite and build a foundation for the future. Steve Cooper kept most of the squad, continued to rely on a solid and compact playing style with strong defensive transitions. The fans continued to be the 12th player. City Ground became one of the toughest stadiums for opponents. Morgan Gibbs-White became the maestro of the team in midfield. Taiwo Awoniyi established himself as the team's top scorer. Epic victories against teams like Liverpool and Chelsea at home. Forest showed it was back to stay. The future of Nottingham Forest. The mission now is clear. Consolidate the team in the Premier League. Invest in the academy and in the signing of young talents. Return to competing in European competitions, something that hasn't happened since the 90s. The fans know the Premier League is tough, but Forest has already shown it's not afraid of challenges, already returned from the depths, already defeated giants of Europe, and now it's ready to write a new chapter of glory. Nottingham Forest is more than just a team. It's a story of resilience, tradition, and passion. Nottingham Forest has lived through heaven and hell. It was once the best team in Europe, fell to the 3rd division, but always came back. The return to the Premier League was just the beginning. Now Forest wants more, and who knows, perhaps the future holds another Champions League for this giant. If you enjoyed this video, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment. Do you think Forest still has fuel to burn in the Premier League? Thanks, and see you next time.